Join our family of creators. Your support means the world to us. Subscribe now to the Content Creator channel. Your support keeps us motivated and helps us bring you fresh, exciting content every week. Hit that subscribe button and be part of our journey. The nation watched as the Supreme Court delivered a landmark ruling. This was no ordinary case, it was a political collision between Donald Trump and Gavin Newsom. At stake, the limits of state power versus federal authority. The outcome would redefine the relationship between states and the federal government for a generation. Tension had been building for months with legal experts and pundits debating the fallout. The case became a proxy war for the soul of the country, representing two starkly different visions for America's future. Trump championed a strong, centralized federal government. Newsom defended states' rights. The Supreme Court's decision was more than a judgment on a single law, it was a verdict on a fundamental ideological divide. When the news broke, it was swift and decisive. The court sided with Trump. The ruling was unanimous, a stunning development that few had anticipated. This gave the decision undeniable weight, a clear, powerful statement from the nation's highest court. Legal principles like the Supremacy Clause and federal preemption suddenly became household terms. The country began to grapple with the immediate and long-term implications of this historic legal showdown. This story is about power politics and the future of the United States. It shows how a single legal case can alter the trajectory of two political careers and the nation itself. We'll break down the legal arguments, examine the court's reasoning, and analyze the fallout for Trump, Newsom, and every American. Understanding this case is essential to understanding the direction our country is heading. The echoes of this decision will be heard for years to come. Laws and elections will be influenced in ways we are only beginning to comprehend. The stage was set for a new era in American governance. The political landscape had been reshaped overnight. The conflict began with a bold move from California. In early 2024, Governor Gavin Newsom signed the California Sovereign Authority Act. This law aimed to let California reject certain federal regulations, especially on the environment and immigration. Newsom called it a defense against federal overreach. Critics warned it could unravel the nation. The act immediately sparked controversy, hailed by some as a stand for states' rights, condemned by others as a threat to national unity. Legal scholars pointed to the Constitution's Supremacy Clause, which gives federal law precedence over state law. The California law seemed to directly challenge this principle, setting up an inevitable legal confrontation. Trump's legal team saw an opportunity, not just a constitutional issue, but a political one. By challenging the act, Trump positioned himself as a defender of national unity and the rule of law. His lawyers quickly filed a lawsuit, arguing the California law was unconstitutional and interfered with federal powers. The case escalated rapidly through the courts, dominating headlines and political debate. The core question, where does federal power end and state power begin? The nation had grappled with this since its founding. Now it was being tested again. Two of America's most prominent political figures were at the center of the storm. The stage was set for a historic Supreme Court showdown. Federal authority and state sovereignty would collide in a definitive way. The legal battle centered on the Federal Supremacy Act of 2023. Passed by Congress and signed into law, it reinforced federal authority in key areas: commerce, national security, and immigration. The law explicitly stated that federal regulations in these domains would override any conflicting state laws. It was a direct response to states like California creating their own rules. Supporters argued it was necessary for national stability and uniformity. Critics, led by Newsom, called it a dangerous power grab that trampled on the 10th Amendment. They warned it would erode federalism and state autonomy. The act became the legal weapon Trump's team used against California's law. The California Sovereign Authority Act resisted federal power. The Federal Supremacy Act asserted it. The two laws were on a collision course. The Supreme Court was asked not just to interpret a state law, but to rule on the constitutionality of the federal act itself. The case hinged on this fundamental conflict between two powerful pieces of legislation. Would federal law prevail, or could states chart their own course? The answer would reshape the American legal landscape. The stakes could not have been higher. In the Supreme Court, Trump's legal team built their case on the Constitution. They invoked the Supremacy Clause. Federal law is the supreme law of the land. California, they argued, cannot nullify federal statutes it disagrees with. The team also cited the Commerce Clause, saying California's law would disrupt interstate commerce and create economic chaos. Businesses would face conflicting rules, harming the national economy. They warned that if California could reject federal law, other states might follow, fracturing the nation. The lawyers emphasized national unity, arguing the federal government's authority must be respected. They pointed to the Federal Supremacy Act as a valid exercise of congressional power, reaffirming federal authority in key areas. The act didn't create new powers, it clarified existing ones. Since the federal act was constitutional and California's law contradicted it, the conclusion was clear. Under the Supremacy Clause, federal law must prevail. Allowing states to create parallel legal systems, they said, was a constitutional impossibility. The justices listened as Trump's team made their case for a unified nation. The stakes were nothing less than the future of American federalism. Newsom's legal team mounted a passionate defense of state rights. They rooted their argument in the 10th Amendment, reserving powers for the states. California's lawyers argued the Federal Supremacy Act was federal overreach, infringing on states' traditional powers. Environmental protection, they said, is a core state responsibility. They challenged the federal government's broad use of the Commerce Clause, arguing many regulations were local matters. California's law, they insisted, was a shield to protect residents from harmful federal deregulation. They warned the federal act was vague and gave Washington unchecked power. The case, they argued, was about preserving the balance between state and federal authority. States, they said, must remain meaningful partners in American governance. After oral arguments, the Supreme Court justices retreated to deliberate. The nation waited, speculation running high. Legal analysts dissected every clue, but the outcome remained uncertain. The central question, how far do states' rights go when they conflict with federal law? The justices weighed the 10th Amendment against the Supremacy Clause, focusing on the Federal Supremacy Act. Behind closed doors, they debated, drafted opinions, and cast votes. Weeks passed, anticipation building. The case became a focal point for national anxieties about the role of government. Supporters on both sides braced for a decision that would set a precedent for decades. The country understood this ruling would shape the future of American federalism. The Supreme Court's decision arrived with a powerful thud, a unanimous 9-0 ruling for Trump. Both liberal and conservative justices agreed. Federal law prevails where the Constitution grants authority. The court found the Federal Supremacy Act a valid use of congressional power, ensuring a consistent national framework for trade and immigration. California's law was ruled unconstitutional for directly conflicting with federal statute. The justices wrote that states cannot grant themselves the power to nullify federal law. Allowing this, they argued, would return the nation to chaos and division. The ruling struck down California's law entirely. The court's focus was on constitutional structure, not policy. Even justices sympathetic to California's goals could not endorse its legal mechanism. The decision was a defense of the constitutional order. The proper way to challenge federal law, the court said, is through the courts or Congress, not state defiance. The verdict was final, reshaping the balance of power. The Supreme Court's decision had immediate political impact. For Trump, it was a massive victory, proof of his leadership and a boost to his campaign. The unanimous ruling let him claim the constitutional high ground. For Newsom, it was a major setback. His signature law was struck down, weakening his national profile. The ruling forced progressive governors to rethink their strategies, moving away from direct defiance. The decision strengthened federal authority, giving Washington more power over states. Both parties had to adjust. Republicans defended federal power, Democrats argued for state autonomy. The ruling scrambled traditional alignments and sparked a new debate about federalism. The legal fallout quickly became political, influencing elections and policy-making. The consequences would ripple through American politics for years. The Supreme Court's decision in Trump v. Newsom set a powerful new precedent. By upholding the Federal Supremacy Act, the court made it harder for states to contradict federal policy. The ruling reinforced a top-down structure of American law, clarifying and expanding federal power. States remain important, but their limits are now clearer. The idea of states as laboratories of democracy is tempered by the need for national unity. For Americans, this case matters. It affects laws on everything from the economy to the environment. The ruling means more uniformity, but also less local flexibility. The legal battle began as a political clash and ended as a constitutional turning point. The case clarified the supremacy of federal law and set a new course for state-federal relations. Its legacy, a more centralized American legal landscape with consequences still